We come to Berlin, we American presidents, because it's our duty to speak in this place of freedom. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Joe Liberatore has served as CEO since 2022 and president of Kforce since 2012. His previous roles include Kforce Interactive president, chief sales officer, chief talent officer, and chief financial officer. Joe is a superb example of what I refer to as a strategic executive, a senior leader who not only has a firm grasp on current industry best practices in business operations, but who is also professionally curious and devotes a lot of time studying emerging business trends and cutting-edge technologies that can better position his organization to compete in an ever-changing business environment. Joe champions innovation, and his vision and commitment to excellence led the firm through two transformative ages, the dot-com era and the coronavirus pandemic. And Kforce experienced significant growth in response to both transformations, largely due to Joe's strong leadership and unequaled knowledge of the staffing industry. Joe first joined Kforce in 1988 and was named Florida Personal Consultant Rookie of the Year the following year. He is a two-time recipient of the firm's prestigious Dick Maddock Award, which is given to the team member who best exemplifies the company's core values. Joe graduated from Oswego State University in New York. In his spare time, he mentors leaders, provides guidance and support to charitable organizations, and enjoys spending time with his family and their beloved rescue pets. Joe was a colleague of mine throughout my entire 15-year career with Kforce, and in my last years, I actually reported to Joe. Joe was my boss, and I learned much from him and consider him a close friend and confidant. Joe, welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here. Always good to spend some time with you.
Yeah, same here. I've been really looking forward to this for a long time. Well, listen, Joe, I mean, I know your background. I served with you for 15 years and we've always kept in touch, but it was very brief, what I read. What more does the audience need to know about Joe Liberatore?
Yeah, I would say probably, I think you kind of covered a lot of my professional career there here at Kforce, which I'm in my 37th season at Kforce currently. But, beyond that, probably, what's more important is my beautiful wife, Michelle, because she's been by my side through the entire journey, and without her support, none of it would have happened. She's probably been my best career coach. She's the one whenever an opportunity would present itself and I'd be like, I really love what I'm doing. I don't think, and she'd be the one saying, nope, you need to take it. You need to take on the new challenge when these guys ever steer you wrong. And then, father of two great sons and now 3 grandkids. So, the personal side, right? You can't de-link professional and personal in today's world. So that's probably the only other pieces that I would add in there, Mike.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I'll add to the audience, probably some Kforce people know this, but like me, Joe, you grew up in New Jersey and you started wrestling as a little kid, wrestled all the way through, but we both wrestled for dominant programs in the state of New Jersey. And then like me, you went and progressed to the college level. And a lot of people don't know this, but our sons actually wrestled on the same high school team. They wrestled in the same club, Branding Wrestling Club, since they were little guys. And so we not only spent a lot of time together at work, we spent a lot of time at practices watching them work out. And then, of course, the trips, we took them all over the country and all of that. So good times. And so if everybody's starting to get the impression that these two guys actually know each other pretty well, they'd be right,
Well,
So,
Mike, I remember the funny part was I remember at the Brandon Wrestling Club when both of us were moved on to the executive team as named executive officers. We used to use those practices to talk a lot of strategy and build our bond, because obviously we always had the friendship, but build our bond on how we effectively work together as leaders. And there were some big lessons that I learned from you on that journey.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, we were so busy during the day. A lot of times, the only time we had a chance to catch up was that wrestling practice at night. So that was very, very good. And I still, Joe, to this day, use our relationship as colleagues, fellow executives. And then, of course, I reported to you as really the ideal setting. That was as good as it got, because I think at one point we controlled the whole back office
Yeah.
of a billion-dollar company. And I don't ever remember a single time when we disagreed or were sideways with each other. I mean, in fact, I think everybody realized those two get along fine, impossible to drive a wedge between them. And their sole desire is to promote the company, do what's right for the company and all of that. So I think we were blessed in that regard, so it was an easy time for me.
Well, yeah, and then I know we want to get on, but this is, I think, it's probably at the core of executive leadership. And I'll never forget, and this was one of the lessons that you taught me early on, and I share this story with our teams to this day, whenever the opportunity presents itself. But you had taken over the IT organization. They put me in responsibility for the finance organization, and those two organizations back then did not get along. So we knew we had some heavy lifting to do, but I'll never forget the first day in, you said, I'd like to sit down with you, Joe, and let's just talk a little bit about how we're going to work together effectively and bring this and unite these teams. And you said something in that meeting, Mike, that has stuck with me through my entire executive career, which is people are going to come to you. They're going to say things about my organization. People are going to come to me and they're going to say things about your organization that you're responsible for. All I ask of you, Joe, don't respond. Don't jump on their side. Identify what it is. Set up a time. You and I can then talk about the situation and get to the truth, and then we'll align. And that gets back to your point, Mike, is not allowing a wedge, right? It's the mommy daddy scenario. Kids are really good about that. They learn which buttons they can push with one and create that divide between parents. Same thing is so important at the executive level.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, thank you for that. That's a great compliment. And I remember saying that, and not that I was teaching you anything, because you knew you agreed with it. I mean, if I didn't say that, you were probably going to say it to me. But the lesson for the impressionable, the emerging leaders out there is that these two organizations, and they were large organization, we're talking hundreds of people on both sides, they were not used to getting along with each other. They were stovepipe, they were adversarial. So we knew what was going to happen. And they did come to us. People started complaining, nitpicking about your group, and you got that same thing about my group. And when they realized we didn't overreact and that we always got together, and that the answer that we would give our respective people in almost every case is, hey, why don't you go down and address it with that guy? Walk across the aisle and talk to them. I think they got so tired of hearing us say that, they stopped coming to us with frivolous, nitpicky, petty complaints and all of that. And amazingly, they learned, they're making us work together. They're not going to relent. Maybe we need to just start doing professional relationships, So
It's the old adage, and you say this all the time, right? Hey, bring me problems, just don't bring me your problems. I mean, you have to work through those dynamics. And again, I mean, this is so logical, but it's the things that people forget about when they're in the fight of business challenges day in and day out, and that responsibility as an executive to, help your people grow. But growth comes with pain and experience. You can't give somebody all the answers, and you can't do somebody else's job for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, in the spirit of getting on, because I know your time is very valuable, before we go, I'd like you to just give a brief couple sentences. A lot of people listening to this podcast, Joe, don't know what Kforce does. They have no idea what the company is, who do they help, who the clients are. Could you just give them a brief rundown on what Kforce is, who they help?
Yeah, and I kind of start with, Kforce actually stands for Knowledge Force, which we branded back coming out of the .com era. And so what we do is we work really in professional staffing and solutions focused mainly on technology within organizations, helping organization leverage technology to drive their strategic objectives. You know, one thing that has kept me in this industry for the past, 36 plus years is we're at the heart of people's careers. So whether we're working with a candidate and they're looking for a contract assignment or working on a project or we're placing them full-time, we're either helping or hurting that person's career. Likewise, those individuals that we're placing in organizations with hiring managers, we're either giving that hiring manager somebody who's going to help them accomplish the projects they're responsible for, or we just gave them a problem. So I think at the heart of it, I think when we updated our vision, it really, it says it all, but it's really about having a meaningful impact on all those lives we serve.
Yeah, I love that. And I a couple canned questions right off the bat that I ask everybody on the podcast. If someone, saw you, a K-Force person saw you at the airport, never gets a chance to talk to you and says, Joe, real quick, I know you're catching your flight. What's your philosophy of leadership? What's Joe Liberatore's executive summary philosophy of leadership? How would you answer that question?
All right, I'll try and keep it concise and short on this one because I could go. We could take up the
Yeah,
whole podcast on this
right.
philosophy, but
Yeah.
I really believe that there's no greater responsibility, probably short of the impact that one has as a parent, because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, as a leader, you are positively or negatively going to impact people's lives that you are responsible for leading. Simply put, I think my philosophy is people and firm first. And what I mean by that is constantly placing the needs of the firm and the people that you are tasked with leading at the top of your daily to-do list. That's how I start every one of my days of who do I have my one-on-ones with today, and how can I help advance them and move them along. I think a leader's responsibility is to at all times seek out the right decisions, and you only get those right decisions by getting a lot of data points. And as we both know, Mike, a lot of times the right decisions are not the popular ones, but as a leader, it's really taking a stance and it's making those decisions for the right reasons.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, the classic question I ask everybody, you've been around leadership a long time, Joe. Leaders, born or made?
Oh, absolutely made. I mean, and guess what? And you know this because of what you do for a living now, Mike. And you have to be willing to make the investment. I mean, there is no end to becoming a leader and evolving as a leader. It is an endless
Yeah.
journey. You're never complete. There's always something that can be improved upon. There's always other skills and capabilities that one should be investing, and you have to invest in yourself. I say this to people, right? Everybody wants firms to train them. If you don't make training yourself your number one priority, then you have nobody else to blame when you look in the mirror but yourself. I mean, so I am a lifelong learner. I mean, leadership books, I just gobble up leadership books because you learn something from everybody through their
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. And I've said it ad nauseum on this podcast, and I'll say it again in case someone's listening for the first time. I've been around leadership a long time. I was in charge of my first people as an 18-year-old Marine, in charge of 12 other Marines. And so I've been around the game quite a bit. And at age 68, not a week goes by that I don't see or hear something that I'd never heard before. And I'm like, how am I been around this long and not read that technique or that saying or whatever? So the journey's never over. It is never over. And, I'll say this to you because it'll resonate. I thought I thought I was a good leader at Kforce, did well. Now that I teach and coach it, Joe, I wish I could go back because I'm so much better now. You know what I mean? And I don't think I was bad then, but I'm so much better now. So the journey never ends, and I love it. And I recognize that in you. That's why I use that term, professionally curious. The first and only person that ever told me that was Dave Dunkel. And he said, Mike, first and foremost among our executives, I'm not sure anybody is more professionally curious. You came in here knowing nothing, and now you're quoting in Harvard Business Review and the Wall Street Journal. And I'm like, well, geez, Dave, thank you. I mean, you're right. I just have an insatiable thirst. And I don't think I was the best at that, but I got to tell you, there was one other person I could count on that executive team to read and cast a wide net and bring up those anecdotes and examples, and that was Joe Liberatore. So there's, in my perspective, watching your ascension to the seat you're in now, which, we could have predicted 30 years ago, that didn't happen by accident. You worked hard. And to your point, you invested a lot of time in yourself and frankly did things that other people were comfortable with themselves and maybe stopped learning. So anyway, enough about that. I'm a Joe Liberatore fan, obviously. Let's get on the heart of it. I want to make sure that the readers and the listeners and viewers of this know that it's not often that I get a seasoned C-level executive. Joe's had several C-level jobs in a billion-dollar publicly traded company. And I want to focus this interview on the executive level because he's been there doing that right now. And so with that, Joe, you have, obviously worked with, studied, and in your duties with Kforce, you've interacted with the executive teams of countless companies since the late 80s. And I want to see have you been able to identify any traits or habits or skills that are common to the most effective executives as individuals and team players?
Yeah, and I'm probably, this isn't rocket science, Mike. I mean, integrity, respect, trust are probably the top three. Being accountable, doing what you say you're going to do so your partners know that you can be counted upon, respecting everybody that you work with, whether they're above you, whether they're below you, whether they're at the peer level. That's got to be ingrained in individuals because I still to this day learn so much. I mean, I'm really big on skip levels. I have a very detailed schedule that's built out with, meeting with my direct reports on a weekly basis. I meet with every one of their direct reports on a regular basis. Some of those are weekly, some of those are every other week, some of them are monthly. And then I even go deeper into the organization because you learn so much, but that's that respect, right? Respect is earned, it's not given. And then trust, so that your team knows that you have their back. I mean, you coming from your military background probably appreciate this more than anybody else, right? You got to know somebody's got your back, and you don't have to be looking over your shoulders. So I would say those teams that work effectively together, knowing that they are doing what's in the best interest of the firm at all times, even when it may not be in their best interest, but they'll make those right decisions. Because I think it's so important for an effective leadership team to work as one team, to not undermine each other, to not be driving personal agendas. We see this in business, and unfortunately, many executive level organizations, there's a lot of the political game versus if you're exerting all of your energy on advancing the cause, whatever those strategic initiatives you're focused on and what the firm's after, that's probably been the biggest differentiator. And I think the other thing is you have to be able to work with and through everybody in the organization. You can't have these, I guess, power centers that drive everything. And it's probably been the number one thing that I've seen in Kforce over the years of those executives that have thrived versus those that maybe, candidly are no longer at Kforce. It's can they work through their partners? How do they address problems? Can they take them head on? Right? Because, hey, situations are always going to come up. But, are you going to have enough of a backbone to set up a meeting and have those tough conversations and get united and work, with and through your people? I mean, those are just some of the common traits that I see.
Yeah, I love it. And again, on the topic of individual executives, we got to talk about the dark side of the coin. So you have seen some, charitably put, less effective executives out there. do most of them seem to have some traits, habits, personality, issues in common as well?
Yeah, I think they do, Mike. And by the way, I also say this, right? Because, and I think everybody will find themselves in this place at one point in time, and especially as you start to move up to the executive ranks. I mean, I've worked for a lot of great leaders, and I've also worked for some leaders that, had some development opportunities. But you know what? I've learned from all of those
Oh,
executives.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all what you make of it. But I think some of those kind of negative traits and habits that I've seen, it's the people who are about themselves versus team. Um, they don't really trust their partners, so there's this lack of trusting partners. And I can do it better. Give me that function, and I can make it better because you have a dependency there instead of trying to work with that other leader and say, how can I get really what I need out of that function and we work more effectively? This, if I own it, everything will be fine is one of those things that I've seen with leaders. And the world doesn't
Yeah.
work that way because little does anybody know, even as CEO, everybody reports to somebody. I mean, I have a board of directors that I'm
Yeah.
responsible for. So
Yeah.
there is no level that you get to where you command and control. You got to be able to work through. I think also inability to own and lead through tough decisions. And instead, I've seen leaders where they pit the firm against and they take the easy out of, I don't agree with this. I'm on your side, but the firm's making me do this instead of getting behind the firm and owning those tough things. And then I also think inability maybe to socialize and promote concepts and ideas effectively. You can have the best idea in the world and you struggle with, why don't people see this? It's because you haven't taken all those inputs and continued to shape that idea to be able to effectively sell concepts and ideas through. And then I would say probably organization, disorganized, is very ineffective, especially the greater your scope of responsibility, organizational skills become even that much more important because you're impacting a lot of people when you're not organized. And then I would say probably last thing is inconsistency with messaging. It's the old adage of some leaders kind of like they're dual personalities. One day you come in and they're friendly, the next day they're under pressure and they're ballistic, and people
Yeah.
wondering which leader, which Joe's going to show up today. So I think being consistent is so important. Being even keeled and level set.
Yeah, I love it. Great answers. I'd like to go back to the concept now, the topic of executive teams, because I'm putting words in your mouth. Tell me if I'm wrong, but if I think your experience at the exec level, which is twice as much as mine or more, um, I'm sure you have seen executive teams where each individual player, incredibly talented, smart, the total package, but for some reason that team was not as effective as another executive team made up of lesser players, so to speak. Not as what happens, Joe. So let's talk about the good teams, whether they're supremely talented, franchise players, every single one of them. Are there any characteristics and attributes and habits of the most effective teams, executive teams that you've observed?
Yeah, well, I think, at the end of the day, right, and this is another characteristic and trait, which is humility. None of us are perfect, and we're all going to make mistakes, but can one be humble enough to own those mistakes, course correct, and those types of things? So I think when we look at effective teams, it does start with the leader of that team. You know, and how is the leader organizing and structuring things? How have they looked at the organizational design of the firm and made sure that the design fosters effective teamwork and team play? Because everyone on that executive team needs to know what their role is and that they are accountable for executing their roles, and also that they're going to trust their partners, that their partners are executing their role and they're not going to second guess their partners. When they pick up on things, it's that get offline, talk through them, but don't throw your partners under the bus. I mean, it kind of where we kicked off the podcast. It's this being arm in arm with each other and not allowing any wedges to come between that team. Because I agree with you. I mean, you can have a team of average executives far outperform a team of superstars. And unfortunately, when you start pulling a lot of superstars, right, it gets back to what we were talking about is, then there's personal agendas and there's power plays and there's positioning and that whole political landscape. When that starts to filter in there, it just starts to be very divisive and break down the overall team.
Yeah, I thank you for that. And I'm going to throw an unscripted question at you. As you know, publicly traded company, the auditors come in once a quarter, and at least twice a year, they would come to me and say, Mike, we want to talk about tone from the top. Is, Joe Liberatore, Bill Sanders, Dave Dunkel, will they ever infer to you that they want you to do something illegal or unethical or immoral? And of course, my answer was no. And they say, and by the way, we're going to ask this question of your team later today. So a lot of where I'm going with this is my entire time on Kforce's executive team, which was 15 years, there was only one time when I considered I was in an executive team and someone ambushed me and threw a problem out. Well, Mike, I got this issue with your organization, and he hadn't talked to me beforehand. It was shocking to me, and so I addressed it. But my point is, Dave Dunkel and Bill Sanders would not tolerate that. If you got to, Mike, if you have a problem with Joe's organization, you go talk to Joe. And if it can't be resolved, then you come to me privately and say, Bill, you got a referee between me and Joe. We're not getting along. Talk to him, get his side of it. So where I'm going with this, and I want to talk to serving CEOs and people that are even in charge of their own departments. What's your thought on how important the lead guy is, that lead sled dog is, in setting the tone for the entire conduct and ethos and personality of a leadership team?
It's at the heart of everything. I mean, it starts right there, starts and ends right there. If you have a broken executive leadership team, there's nowhere else to look but in the mirror. And because then, where am I missing it? Where am I not effectively communicating? What behaviors am I allowing to happen that are unhealthy behaviors? How am I growing and coaching and developing and uniting the team? And it's having a zero tolerance. I completely agree with you. There's certain things that, are non-negotiable. And that I started with really those three traits that I had mentioned. Those are non-negotiable at Kforce, and I don't care how good somebody is. They could be the best staffing executive in the industry. They can go work somewhere else, because it comes down to that teamwork and everybody working together. So you're just spot on, Mike. It's a zero tolerance.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I want to talk back again now to the individual executive. I want to mine Joe Liberatore's mind. I think the answer you're about to give to this question, everyone that's ever worked with and for you, your current executive team, would say, yeah, that's exactly what Joe holds us to. So my question is, what do you look for in your executives? You got a current executive team right now. I'm sure there are varying talent and skill levels. People are blessed with certain things that others aren't. But what do you look for to say, this guy is checking my boxes, what I consider an effective executive as an individual executive in charge of his domain, and as a team player? To your earlier point, the ability to work and collaborate well with other people at his level and below. Any thoughts?
Yeah. I only have one vantage point, and what I've learned through my career is some people are really good about working up, and you can kind of start to get a false perspective of how somebody is working with the rest of the team, and it's painful whenever you discover those things too far down the road, and they can't be addressed and coached through, right, to save that individual, because sometimes people learn, right. they learn from others they've worked for. And sometimes bad habits have to be broken to really make them as effective as possible, which is why I'm a big proponent on 360 type, the 360 interview type process, but not as much like the check the box where somebody has a bunch of questions and it's rate this
Yeah.
person 1 to 5. What
Yeah.
we've been doing more recently is actually we do personal interviews. So you establish whatever it is, this body of 5 or 10 people that are going to be involved with that, and they are actually interviewed, because the feedback that then comes to that executive is so much more powerful on building out their action plan and their development plan, and spotlighting where some of their gaps or their weaknesses. So I am a real big proponent on getting that feedback from the people that people have to work with day in and day out, because that gives you all of the information you need to now put together a good development plan, right? And an aspirational plan for that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I agree with that entirely. And further on the team level, going back to this, the best teams and all of that, um, what do you look for, if not demand, Joe, from your executive team, in the sense that, again, let's just say you got all A players, you got all A rods, franchise players. What level do you expect and demand of them when it comes to respect for each other, the ability to, what I call, argue well? And as you know, when I was there with Kforce, we had some spirited debates in that executive team. I think people, it would have shocked people that, a relatively lower ranking executive could go at Dave Dunkel and say, Dave, I don't think, and we'd argue. It never got personal. It often got spirited.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Dave Dunkel or Bill Sanders would slap the table. Boom. Okay. I heard everybody. We're taking option B. And when we left that room, and we used to have lunch afterwards, everybody left that room smiling, and option B it was. And to your earlier point, I don't think we had any leaders going out to the team saying, you're not going to believe what Dunkel wants to do. It's not my idea, fellas, but you got to do it. I think we went out there and said, it's option B, and it's a great idea, and it's going to work, and here's what we're going to do. Here's our part, and all of that. So, again, I'm blathering on here. So, respect for each other, the ability to argue well in pursuit of the best options for the company, not necessarily what your department wants to do or is easier for it to do. And then just the ability to unite on specific initiatives, some of which may not seem popular or even make sense at the time. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, Mike, you remember this, when I was given the responsibility of succeeding Bill in the president role, what was one of the first things that I worked on with the team? It was putting together a leader's creed. And the last line of that leader's creed was all act firm first, right? All of my actions will place the firm first, because that's kind of what you're talking about there. At the end
Yeah.
of the day, there's forums where it's healthy to have those debates, where you do want the best thinking from everybody. You want those diverse thoughts of experiences that people have dealt with in the past, because that's kind of like you're making the soup, and everything's going in there. But at the end of the day, decisions have to be made. And sometimes, I've been in spots where it's been 100% of what I thought we should do. There's other times when it's been 5% of what I thought we should do. But at the end of the day, when that table was slapped and we went out and we had to execute the play, I was 100% on board. You got to leave that behind. So you are so spot on. And again, I think that's one of the dynamics that you see with effective versus ineffective executive leadership teams, are people truly doing that and getting behind whatever decisions have been made, irrespective of where their view was in the past. At that point in time, this is what's been decided and is in the best interest of the firm. At some point, right, it's that whole collaborative leadership style, which I believe I'm a collaborative leader. I like getting people's inputs and thoughts and ideas and them to be part of the solution. But at the end of the day, when decisions made, sometimes there's varying percentages that people agree or disagree, but now you got to move forward, right? It's the old adage of it's really easy to be a leader and come up with the right idea and try and direct it through the firm and force it through the firm, but you very seldom get adoption. It takes forever to get the adoption. You spent your whole time fighting that battle versus spending the time on the front end to get those thoughts and ideas and then get to whatever decision you need to make around any given type of priority.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you for that, Joe. And I want to go back to your 360s and all of that about your comment about you're the big guy. I mean, everybody's coming up to you, and I'm not accusing your executive team of this, so let's just anonymize it. It is, I've been there. I have had many people report to me, and of course, they're always putting their best foot forward. And then over the years, I found at times something happened and caused me to look deeper. And while that guy or gal was always looking good to me, sharp, responsive results, I was unaware that in some cases they were a toxic leader. And now that I'm an executive coach, I've been in, since I've left Kforce, dozens of companies. And sometimes my job is to go in there and deal, help someone that's, if they're going to get fired if they don't shape up. And in almost every case, the first thing I do is I go to HR and say, can you give me the attrition statistics for this guy or gal's department? And in almost every case, there's been a revolving door of people leaving. So they're never good enough for this guy. And Joe, in almost every case, let's say it's at the executive level, someone reporting to you, in almost every case, the CEO is unaware that that person who reports to him has had that much turnover. Because as you know, this isn't the military where if you sign up for 5 years, you're staying in 5 years, whether you got bad leaders or not. People vote with their feet. And so my lesson to folks is, to exactly your point, don't just stop your observations with your line of sight. Get out there. And I think every CEO should know the attrition statistics for every executive, their departments, and the people working for them. Because Joe, I know, and I'll get on with it, let you answer this. You would never tolerate a toxic leader. But I'll bet you over the years, you have found out that there has been a toxic leader somewhere in your organization at some level. You just didn't know about it. And sometimes that guy's boss didn't know. It's always when they leave that you find out what the person's been doing or not doing. Or like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. I thought we had a great company here. These people in this department were hating to come to work every day. And your time, Joe, your thoughts.
Well, I'm going to say something, and I'm sure this is not news to anybody, right? But people don't leave companies; they leave leaders. And so, to your point, Mike, I completely agree. Understanding not just the turnover, but the whys behind the turnover, because sometimes turnover is healthy if people aren't performing, because sometimes leaders have very high standards, and that could drive some of the turnover. So it's understanding the whys behind the turnover, which is why we're very big on exit interviews, because that exit interview starts to give you those insights. Surveys start to give you those insights as well. Like we're very big, we use Glint, which is a Microsoft product for our engagement surveys. And, we get it down to the local leader level, and then it rolls up, and that starts to give us insights where there's development opportunities or maybe blind spots, or there's something that has to be addressed. So, again, it's multi-pronging this stuff. And I go back to this, which is why when we were talking about effective habits, organization and planning to me is probably number one on the list from a habit standpoint, meaning I literally roll into the beginning of a year and probably 60 to 65% of my year is already planned. Think of that. 60 to 65% of my year is planned on January 1st. And why is that? because of all of my reoccurring meetings that have evolved over time, right? There's the battle rhythm meetings of what meetings need to happen on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, whether it's strategy or whether it's one-on-ones. And all those meetings, they all roll forward for me. So, somebody one time was doing an assessment on, literally 25, 30 hours of my week are planned before my week ever starts. And then everything's filled in around those, because again, this is why I'm so big on skip levels, not just direct report meetings, but meeting with the people who are working with those direct reports. And then even meeting with, key influencers that are in the firm, because that's where you get all the insights and you can start to connect dots. I always I learned this one in the past is, it's kind of, I use a hand. If I have a leader who's having problems with these 4 individuals, and all 4 of these individuals are having a common problem with the leader, these 4 individuals usually aren't broken. It's usually a development opportunity with that one leader, right? It's the one-to-many type scenario. So I'm always looking for those kind of things, so that hopefully you can get to things early before they become irreconcilable and you can't fix them. No one ever wants to get it to that point, because a lot of times these are developmental opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think you mentioned blind spots. I wanted to throw an ad hoc question out of there. I got to tell you, Joe, I mean, again, I thought I was a good leader at Kforce, but and as you know, I hired a bunch of Marines over the years, and the vast majority of them did great. But I hired one time who I'd known in the Marine Corps. And so obviously I thought well of him. Well, long story made short, in hindsight, I had blind spots with him. And I found out after a year that he just wasn't a good leader. And he was doing some things that were not to my approval or yours. It just wasn't well. And when I asked people, and so I ended up firing him. It was a well-deserved, but he had already caused damage. People had already left the organization, and I felt terrible. I never even considered the fact that this guy would do it. And when I asked his colleagues, how long have you known this? He said, Mike, pretty quickly. And I said, well, what were you thinking? They said, doesn't Mike see this? And if he does, why doesn't he act? And that one hit me right between the eyes, Joe, because first of all, if I'd have known about it, I'd addressed it earlier. But it also showed me, despite my long relationship with these folks, they were still a little bit hesitant, or were hesitant, to come and tell me that someone they knew was my friend was not meeting the mark. And I learned that, boy, you better get out there and be more vigilant, never let this repeat. So any thoughts, personal anecdotes for you? You ever had any blind spots? And then what do you do? What do you tell these leaders out there? How can they avoid falling victim to blind spots? Because everybody has them. Let's face it. I tell people, you have to, if you're a leader, you have to love people. And it's okay for you to love your people. What gets you in trouble is when you fall in love with them. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is really at the heart of, especially as one takes on greater responsibility from an executive leadership standpoint. This is usually a defining characteristic of ability to be successful and take on more and continuing to take on more. And part of this kind of comes back to, Mike, what you're talking about is what people also lose sight of. I'll kind of start here. The more that one's responsible for, eventually you become the 800-pound gorilla, and you become desensitized to the impact of your words. And so, I'm always trying to be very cautious about what I say, how I handle things in different settings, because, and you're the one to taught me, right? It's commander's intent.
Yeah.
You want your intent to be clear. And so you have to understand those things. But blind spots, they happen. And it always pains me, right? This is the humility aspect. I take that personal when I miss something like that, because I did a disservice for all those individuals that I tasked
Yeah.
that individual with leading. And those are probably some of the hardest nights and experiences to deal with, because
Yeah.
you've let those people down because they've been having to tolerate, I don't want to say a hostile, but not as healthy work environment, and
Yeah.
work's hard enough if you make it harder on individuals. So, but you got to be connecting with people, and you got to be building those relationships to hopefully get to that place where people know they can bring you things, and there's going to be no repercussions for that, because we're all just here to have the healthiest firm possible. One of the things that we evolved here a little while back, and this is since you left Kforce, my view is when somebody comes into the work environment, they should be in a cocoon, meaning they shouldn't have to worry about all of those outside pressures, whether they're political, because we're all entitled to those views and opinions. But when we're inside Kforce, we are here to
Yeah.
serve each other, right? Leaders are here to be servant leaders. We are here to serve clients. We're here to serve candidates. And so you got to kind of foster that kind of environment. And then, we have a commitment to integrity, which we take people through an annualized training on our commitment to integrity. And that gives people, what are those avenues they have to raise concern, whether it's going to HR, because sometimes, they don't want to bring it to a leader, especially executive leader, but you got to constantly remind people there are channels where you can go in confidence, because we want to know about those things, because we can't fix something if we don't know it's broken. And that's again why I was going back to, it's engagement surveys, it's surveying your people, it's 360s, it's those communication channels to HR where people can express things, because the goal is to get after problems before they turn into a fire, right? And they can now no longer be repaired, because then that usually results in termination and those kind of things. And no one wants to do that to somebody, and no one wants to ever be in that position. But this is why I probably, and you could ask anybody at Kforce, I bet you in a given year, you could count on one hand how many times I ever cancel a skip level or a one-on-one interview. Because
Yeah.
sometimes something will come up, but the first thing I would say is, Katie, who helps my planning, I was like, find the next available time, because I don't want it to go a whole nother cycle,
Yeah.
but it's that kind of commitment. You got to be willing to spend time with the people.
Yeah. I love that. And I want to dovetail on to that. First of all, sage comments. They're going to be very helpful to all. And I'm still learning from you, Joe, but you're also talking about presence. You are maintaining a presence throughout the firm by doing this. And I think it's very critical. I know you share the opinion that leaders must exert their presence at every level. People need to see their leaders. So I want to ask you a question for bricks and mortar and then now the remote, because I never really had to deal that much with the remote. I don't know if you know this. It's kind of a funny term. I wanted to get out of my office every day. We had that 4-story building, and a lot of my people were on every floor. So I engaged in a practice that I call strategic urination. And people say, "What are you talking about?" Well, as you know, there were bathrooms on each end of each floor. So if I could, and it was time to go to bathroom, if I could hold it, I would walk all the way down the top floor. And on the way, I'm like, "Hey, how you doing?" Stopping, talking to people, Same thing all the way down to third. And I would just keep going. I wouldn't take the elevator. And eventually I would get in the bottom bathroom on the bottom floor by the gym and go, and then all the way back up. So in the course of walking back and forth, those 15 minutes, I actually may have had small interactions with 100 people that day. And you multiply that sometimes, not every day I didn't go down fourth floors, but my point is this. For the people that are still largely brick and mortars and they're in one building or a couple buildings on a campus, what do you recommend to leaders? How can they, aside from meetings, how can they be present and expose themselves? Because, you know this, Joe, any interaction with someone at Kforce, any interaction with Joe Liberatore is flattering to them and valuable to them. So your advice to people, bricks and mortars, and then how are you doing it now, Joe? And I really don't know. How are you doing it now that things are mostly remote and virtual? How is Joe Liberatore still giving that Liberatore touch to offices 2,000 miles away from you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you touched upon the bricks and mortars. Yeah, you have to get out of your office, right? Otherwise, your office is just a turnstile because there's always the next meeting at your door. You have
Yeah,
to, you have to be intentional. To your point, whether it's a bathroom break or whether I'm going to carve out this hour a day to do a walk around, you have to be intentional about it. Again, this goes back to planning. You got to plan it in your schedule or it doesn't happen to get out and about with if you're in bricks and mortar. It's kind of why I like our new Midtown location where as we designed our new office space, because it's unlike you remember the days when we had an executive center. You basically you could never leave that executive area if you didn't make it intentional because you get your coffee there, you had a bathroom there and everything else.
yeah, yeah,
By design, we made them put the best coffee machine that you basically had to get out and about because that's where you get to bump into people. So, I mean,
yeah, I
there's
love it.
different things you can do through office design
Yeah,
to create it as well, to make sure you remove the conveniences. But I'd say from a virtual standpoint, I actually get more exposure today to a diverse population within Kforce because of being virtual than I ever did when we were just pure bricks and mortar. Because what we've done is we've kind of taken the best of both. What we learned through the great shutdown, the pandemic, things like that I get to do now.
yeah,
I think I probably just completed my 34th new hire cohort. So every month we have our new hires go through our cohort, which is a training program. I have not missed one call, 34 months in a row. Okay. And I'm on there. And these are people that have been with Kforce. Sometimes it's their first day. Sometimes they've been there 2 weeks, but no one really has been there greater than 2 weeks. And I jump on that call, one, to kind of frame Kforce a little bit so they hear the vision and the direction. But my favorite part of those calls is the Q&A. I always leave probably 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A. And these are people that just joined Kforce and they're having Q&A with the CEO because I'm trying to, again,
yeah,
tone at the top. I'm trying to send a message that, hey, you had access to me. If you don't have access to your leader, I want to hear about it because that's not who we are as Kforce. So I'm leading by example of where my expectation
yeah,
is in leadership accessibility. The same thing, typically on that same day, Mike, I'm on a call where we recognize our anniversary. So we have our people, whether some people are celebrating their first, some people are celebrating their 40th, and all of our people come on that call because we're recognizing there. And I don't miss those calls because I want to address the people. The other
yeah,
thing that we do is, we have our quarterly awards that we do with our teams. Dave Kelly and other executives of ours, we jump on those awards calls to acknowledge the performance. But again, what's most important, every one of these sessions, there's a Q&A session because
yeah,
I can't make people ask questions, but I'm not afraid to take on any question. If it's on somebody's mind, they're not the only one thinking it. You got to provide those forums where people they can feel comfortable throwing a question out there and hear direct, not through a memo or third party. So it's creating all those environments.
yeah. Great. I have great thoughts. I want to go back to the your thoughts on executives, individual executives, and in a sense, you're talking talk to your own executive team. If Kforce's executive team is still like it was when I was there, you have how many people on the executive team as a whole now, Joe?
13.
So you've got 13, and how many named officers? 4 or 5?
Yeah, we've really moved away from named
Okay.
officers because, that's really an SEC reporting requirement. Bottom line is
Yeah.
they're all executive leaders in the firm.
Okay.
Very
So I'll count.
cross-functional, right? Because we look at addressing, making sure that there's representation for every corner of the firm.
Fair enough. So let me phrase the question this way. In a 13-person executive team, clearly some of those executives occupy more senior roles. So how does someone, not the CEO or the CFO or another senior president, how does someone on your executive team or any executive team sit on that executive team say, you know, I'm here, I made it to the executive level. What do I need to do to go to the next level? How do I distinguish myself so that when there is another opportunity for the chief marketing officer or, you know, the president, that my name is at the table being discussed?
Yeah, it's a great question, by the way, and I think this goes even beyond, let's say, that executive leadership team to take on more within that executive leadership. I think this is leadership on how do I advance myself as a leader,
Yeah,
and it's probably just maybe a little bit more accentuated in the executive leadership, and some of these dynamics will change. But I'm going to talk about executive leadership. First, it goes back to what are you doing to build your cross-functional relationships? Meaning,
yeah,
if I'm sitting in that group of 13 and I look around that table, have I done everything humanly possible in my power to build the strongest relationship with every one of these partners? Because some of them I interface with on a more regular basis, but the bottom line is my success, if I am to take on more, is dependent upon each and every one of them more and more or in different situations. So what have I done to build those cross-functional relationships and partnerships? It's the old adage of, I guess, succession worked when it's not a surprise to everybody, right? When it doesn't work is when somebody's anointed and people don't buy in or they don't believe in that person because that person hasn't
yeah,
built those relationships. So,
yeah,
especially if you want to move to the highest levels in an organization, that's that's really your responsibility. I also think, what are you doing to invest in yourself, right? What are you reading? What are you reading about business? What are you reading about leadership? Who are you mentoring throughout the firm, right? Mentorship to me is not just
yeah,
about your direct chain of command. Who am I spending time with in other pockets of the firm and helping them become a better leader, right? And
yeah,
investing in those types of things. What are you doing to bring creative ideas to the table, right? It's one thing to be a leader and somebody gives you the play to execute, and now you have to just go out and execute it. But what new thoughts, creative ideas, and concepts are you bringing to the table to challenge the firm, right? And that doesn't just come out of a brainy idea. You got to have facts and substance behind it. So, I'm not real big on people just bringing concepts. It's give me some meat behind it because I want to know that somebody has thought through unintended consequences, that somebody has thought through the ripple effect of things. It's easy to come up with a big idea, but operationalizing those ideas is where the rubber hits the road and the heavy lifting. Have you put any thought into how would you operationalize that? And has it thought through? Who have you socialized with so that you can now continue to formulate and shape and get the rough edges off of it because you have others' input? And it's really, do you keep a cool head? And what I mean by that is not ever overreacting to anything, being even keeled, because that's the other thing
yeah,
that people are looking for, especially in executive leadership. Hey, things can get on fire or whatever else, but it's not going to be the end of the world. We'll work through it. We've been there before. So I'm always looking for that in senior leaders as people take on more. Are they even keeled? Do they dissect problems, come up with solutions, and those types of things, Mike? So I don't know if that's kind of what you were looking for.
yeah. Yes, yeah, no, I think it's absolutely great. And then I want to go down to, I want your answer on this one. So now you're talking to non-executives, people who haven't reached the executive level yet. And I think a lot of your previous answer will apply here, but is there any more guidance that would you give someone in Kforce who's not on the executive team, talented person, and they don't get that visibility a lot of times, Now you're doing a lot to maintain presence and all that, but my point is someone within Kforce or any other organization that is not at the executive level, first of all, how do they prepare themselves to be ready for that opportunity? And what can they do to show people, hey, I'm out here. I want to go there. I'm preparing for it and I want to be considered for it. How do they distinguish themselves? How do they come on Joe Liberatore and the executive team's radar? Hey, what about when they put me in charge of the technology group, Joe? At some point they were at the table and they're like, what about Mike Etor? How does somebody get their name in that what about Susie Jones or Fred Smith's conversation?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think one of it is, and I've seen this throughout my career, it's patience. People in general are impatient,
Mhm.
and you have to have faith and trust. Because if you do all the right things, everything takes care of itself in time. And I often share this. I never looked for one opportunity in Kforce, and I've had a lot of different roles. I've always been tapped on the shoulder
Yeah.
and asked to take on something else, to go create something. I was never looking to become CEO. I mean, it just evolved that way because
Yeah.
I just come from the school of focus on what your responsibility is and be the best at possible at doing what you are tasked in doing within the firm. If you do that, everything else usually takes care of itself. And the other thing is, so performance is a big piece of it. Performance is measured in a lot of different ways, but you have to be a performer because you don't deserve taking on more if you're not performing in what you're already tasked with. And that could go as deep as you want within the firm. And the next is involvement. Are you always raising your hand to get involved in other things? There's always different special projects that are going on or groups that were being formed to explore this or to work on this. Are you the person who's raising their hand saying, hey, what can I do to help? I realize that I'm not getting paid to do this. Okay, I'm still gonna have to be responsible for my day job, but I want to get involved in those things because I want to grow and I want to learn and I want to have experiences. So, who's looking to get involved in those special type of projects? And those are the kind of things that give you visibility within a firm because that gives you different exposure, not just with those up the chain of command, but also across your peers. What are you doing to earn respect of the peer group that you work within, no matter what level you are in the firm? You got to be a go-to person. Do your peers call you to get your insights, input, advice in and around things, or do you never hear from your peers except when you're put in group sessions? Those are things people should be looking at in the mirror and saying, am I really doing everything I can? What value am I bringing to the team to help advance the team? It was one of the things I always looked to do when we bought Source Services back in 1997. And I was one of 8 RVPs in the technology sector after we brought those two organizations together. I was the only one from Romac. All my 7 peers were from Source, the company that we bought. And so
Yeah.
what did I look to do? It's like, how do I differentiate myself from this population? I was always raising my hand. We were looking to redo our systems and we called it Kobe, which was the system. I was like, I'll come in on weekends. I'll do whatever. I want to be involved with that because I wanted to shape that. And that started to
Yeah.
catch, Dave Dunkel's idea. Same thing. When there was a market that opened up, it's like, I'll move there. I mean, I managed
Yeah.
Atlanta for a year and a half. I didn't move there, but I was on a plane every Monday morning at 6 a.m. I lived there the whole week and I came home at Friday night on a 6 p.m. flight. So I literally worked in that market for a year and a half. That was very painful on my family and
Yeah.
on everything. But are you willing to take on those real big challenges, right? Because careers aren't just this linear thing that just happens. I mean, they're more like somebody had said this a while back. They're like a jungle gym. They kind of move around. And whenever you can take on something new, take it on because you're going to grow and you're going to develop from it versus saying, well, I don't want that job because this is the only job that I'm really interested in. Then you're limiting your career because the more diversity that one has, the more exposure, getting involved in things that are outside your domain make you a better leader.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm a big proponent. And my track record at Kforce was that I didn't ask for any promotions. Kforce hired me to start a leadership development program. And then the dot-com crash happened. We had a lot of attrition. Things were blowing up in some cases. And to your point, Joe, they just kept, like you, they just kept tapping me on the shoulder. Mike, this guy left. Would you take over this department? And my answer was always yes. Now, I had no training, no experience in any of them. But my answer was yes. And I'll throw this anecdote. I'm not sure you're aware of it, but I say this not to aggrandize myself, but to tell people be patient and don't be greedy, so to speak. Well, what are you going to pay me? I remember one time Bill Sanders came in. This might have been around 2005. And he said, Mike, we're figuring out compensation for next year. What's your base pay? And I said, 150. And he said, he's writing it down. He goes, what was it last year? And I said, 150. And he said, what was it the year before that? And I said, 150. And he goes, the year before that? I said, 150. He put a paper down and he said, when is the last time you had a raise? Because he knew he's now in charge. He's the CIO. He's in charge of, knowledge. He's, and I said, 1999. And he was like, why didn't you say something? And I said, well, I just figured do a good job. They'll recognize it and they'll make it right at some point when they're ready. And so he folded his paper up and he said, you're going to get a raise. And so I did. I got a really good raise and all that. But my point is, I think he was astounded. Now, I'm not advising anybody to wait 4 years without saying anything. But my point is, I just wanted to be there. To your point, I was willing to do whatever and work hard because I knew merit and results will eventually take care of business for you. Any last thoughts on this?
No, you're spot on, Mike, and very similar to yourself, right? These are the things people don't fully understand. I mean, I remember when we were going through that whole .com initiative, and our business got hit really hard. I mean, I took a 25% pay decrease, base pay. Bonuses were long gone. 25% base pay because I wanted to be part of the firm and I wanted to weather that storm and take on others. Similar to when Dave Dunkel had asked me to step out of an RVP role and lead our .com initiative, I took a 50% pay cut. I was the #1 performing RVP. I was making really, really good money. But this was a back office. It wasn't a revenue generating, so it was paid like it was back office. And basically, I took a 50% pay cut to do that. But you know why I did that? Because I was like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to be involved in something that was going to shape business and how business was changing. It turned out to be one of the best moves that I ever made because that's really what gave me visibility at the board level and in a lot of other areas because of being at that tip of the spear. But that was a bit. That was a bet. I mean, it was a bet on myself.
Yeah.
And that's what individuals have to be willing to do is bet on themselves. It's not about pay me and now I'll go do that job. It's where's your heart at? What are you really about? Are you about just money? Or are you about trying to make an impact and influence and change the course and direction of people, your business, your industry, and because if that's your headset, everything else usually takes care of itself at some point in time, to your point.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, Joe, listen, our time is coming to an end. I got to get you to your next meeting on time, but I can't let you out of here without asking the fantasy question I ask of everybody at the end. If you were able to bring back one leader from the past and spend a day with that leader, who would you choose and why?
One leader from the past. I'd probably bring back Randy Marmon, who was a good friend that I worked with for a long time, because Randy had one of those unique blends of, I love the way his mind thought strategically and processed things. And I used to always, he's one of those individuals, I always walked away from every meeting thinking about things a little bit differently than maybe what I thought about in the beginning of that. And Mike, it's why I maintain a relationship with you. I mean, I learned from you to this day. I mean, I appreciate you sending me your emails. because the nuggets that you have in your emails that go out, and then just even when we catch up one-on-one as friends, just to catch up on life and everything else. So see, I already get that from you, which is why I didn't mention you, because you're I mean, to this day, a couple times a week, you're sharing nuggets with me that continue to evolve and develop me as a leader.
Well, I appreciate that. And then to Randy's point, to your point on Randy, what a great leader. One of my better colleagues came and embraced me. As you know, when we first showed up, the military guys at Kforce, not everybody was a fan. And he was. And he sought me out and said, "Sit down. What are you doing? What's Dave hired you for?" And all of that. And fortunately, it's sad that he passed away so suddenly. He is truly missed. But I was fortunate enough to be able to interview him for this podcast. So for those people out there listening that want to know about Randy Marmon, go back a couple dozen episodes. He's out there and sharing sage wisdom. I'm so glad I captured him on video, because he's gone, but his wisdom is still there. And I will leave you with this, Joe. It's a mutual admiration society between me and you. In fact, I've told my family, if you ever in the future meet anyone, and you tell your kids this, with the names Dunkel or Liberatore, you ask them, "Are you any relation to Dave Dunkel or Joe Liberatore from K?" And if they are related, you do whatever you can to hook them up in any way you can, because you benefited from their kindness and compassion and mentorship to me, your father, you know. So I can't thank you enough, Joe. Just like I tell Dave, I appreciate you. I love you. I can't thank you enough for coming here and sharing your knowledge. And I'm still learning from you. You know, I listen to the earnings calls. I'm like, wow, he's doing great, you know. And I remember the days when we were hurting, the stock was $1.55.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Look at you guys now, and I got to tell you, I mean, I retired at the end of 2013, but I remain a Kforce fan, and the company's doing great, and I am just thrilled for the company, and I am thrilled for you as well. Well deserved. It's always good to see someone get someone that richly deserves it, and you're there, my friend. So thank you for that. And this is going to be a great episode. My selfish request is that you consider coming back someday. Let's talk about leadership again at a different topic, different level perhaps, but there's more Joe Liberatore that we'd like to tap into.
No, thank you, Mike. And one last comment from me, because you triggered a thought, right? Because this is something that I think is so important. You know, how do you know as an executive the impact that you made on a firm? You know, what footprint did you leave behind? And I can say this with the utmost confidence. You know, Mike Etor's footprint was left on Kforce. I mean, especially when I look at everything that we do from a strategic planning standpoint, because you remember, you were the person that I tasked when I became president, and you raised it. It's like, you know, hey, our planning process hasn't been that great. I think there's a lot of area of opportunity. And you took that on, meaning you weren't asked to do it. You did that on your own because you knew it would make the firm healthier and better. And that work that you did in laying that foundation, it is no small part of the trajectory shift in Kforce and how we're organized. You know, so that's when you know you've been an effective leader, when you can look back and say, did I leave a footprint there?
Well, thank you so much. You know, I say this, Joe, that not everybody at Kforce was a Mike Etor fan, but I like to think if you asked everybody, like, okay, maybe Mike was a prickly pear to you or whatever, but did Mike have any hidden agendas? Did he ever act in the interest of anything other than what was best for the firm? And I really want to believe that the answer would be like, no, he was always out for Kforce, numero uno, vice his own personal interests. And that's just not me. I think they can say that about you and any other competent leader at every other level. If they know you're doing what's right for the firm, for the organization, then they'll tolerate some things that they may not necessarily like or agree with or even understand. They know he's acting in the best interest of the organization, which is the essence of leadership. So, all right, Joe. Well, listen, I don't want to make you late for your meeting. Thank you so much again. And please take care of yourself. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks, Mike. Always great to spend time with you.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.